All right, team. Well, yeah, no feedback now. That's great. Well, morena everyone, welcome back into Council Chambers for the Strategy and Operations meeting for Thursday the 12th of May. Good to be all around the table and not sitting in our lounges and dining rooms, looking at each other on screens. So it's it's nice to be back here with you all. Welcome to staff and externals supporting us today. Good morning, Marilyn, and to those that are joining us online via Zoom. If we can just move to the council blessing, and I'm going to ask Councillor Halliday to read the blessing out.
Through you, Mr. Chair. As we deliberate on the issues before us, we trust that we will reflect positively on the communities we serve. Let us all seek to be effective and just, so that with courage, vision and energy we provide positive leadership in a spirit of harmony and compassion.
Thank you, Martin. I move to item number 3, which is apologies. I'm not aware of any. Sorry, I should have checked with you tonight, not received any. Just running through. Sorry, Councillor Buswell had messaged me and she's an apology for the meeting. So if we could have someone not aware of any others, move Councillor Hanford, seconded by Councillor Compton. Any further discussion? All those in favour say aye. Aye, against, and that is carried. Just before I move on to the next item, as I normally do, we've got a 441-page agenda today and some quite meaty topics to get through. So I will try and steer us through efficiently and allow time for discussion. But due to the size of the content, I'll also be pulling you up if we tend to drag on a little bit, just so that we can keep on time and get through in a reasonable hour. So with that, I'm just going to move on to declarations of interest relating to items on the agenda. None have been brought to my attention. And so we'll now move on to item number 5, public speaking time. And I believe we have one public speaker via Zoom. Very good.
Morena, Mr. Doinen.
Good morning. Can you see me now?
We can.
You can? Okay.
You just turned yourself off.
Good morning, Pat. I'm going to call you by your first name because I'm not sure how to pronounce your last name, and we've had some discussions around the council chamber around the importance of pronunciation. So it'd be maybe helpful if you did let us know how to pronounce your last name. I think Tanika might have had it right.
Dignan, it's Irish.
Almost. Very, very good. Well, good morning. Thank you for your email yesterday. For elected members, if you haven't seen, we've also received an email. You've got 3 minutes, and if you just want to talk through the matters, we'll open it up at the end for any questions from elected members, either via Zoom or in the chamber. Over to you.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity and apologise for asking for it late. The papers that I'm focusing on is the housing strategy. It's a very impressive set of documents. I note that the discussion of social housing need is very appropriate. I won't be focusing on that, but I support the initiatives you're taking in that area. I want to focus on the research paper report prepared by Community Housing and Livingston Consultants. The point that comes out of that is that it provides forecasts of the increase in dwellings in the Kāpiti district. My observation is that that report, not surprisingly, doesn't discuss coastal hazards, nor in any detail does the covering report. However, I'll leave any further discussion of that to the discussion of PC2, which is where it comes to the fore. As regards my point about the research report, it is that it shows that only 1/3 of new dwellings in the Kāpiti district would be expected to be multi-dwelling units, or units or buildings that have more than one dwelling. And so 2/3 are going to be houses. I would note that the NDRS allows a 3-storey building, and as well as allowing 3 buildings on a section. And that I just put it to you that the incentive for people building in the coastal areas will be to take advantage of that to build larger buildings, not multi-dwelling buildings. And that people will trigger a rush to height so as to look over your neighbours. So where there are vacant sections on Tereri Road, you will find that people are going to consider pouring energy and money and use resources to build larger, taller buildings to look over the coastal rim. So I think that the result is that 2/3 of the buildings that are being built will have an incentive for people to go high, using up the building resources of the Kāpiti district to no effect on the affordability, in fact, quite the opposite, and also resulting in a pepper potted landscape with 3-storey buildings and 1-storey buildings. I just finally note that you might say, well, you can build 2 stories at the moment. People don't do much of that. And the reason, of course, is that 2 stories doesn't get you over the coastal rim, whereas 3 would, from a viewpoint of view. So perhaps one point of a practical nature is that you might consider saying, well, let's have NDRS in 3 stories, but only if you are doing a multi-dwelling construction. For example, if you want to have a 3rd story, then you have to have 2 kitchens in the building, thereby indicating it's going to be 2 dwellings that will result. Absent that, the effect of the central government's imposition of NDRS in the Kāpiti area is likely to be quite perverse in areas where you have a coastal view.
Thank you, Pat. I allowed you to go on there a little bit because you are the only speaker and it's an important topic. We have some questions. We have some questions there. I'll go to Councillor Randall first so that I don't forget him, and then Councillor Compton, and we'll see who's up after that. Good morning, Bernie.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Pat. Pat, could you elaborate a bit more about the point that the research paper does not contain anything on coastal hazards or climate change, and that, in your view, it may have to be amended because of changes made by the Ministry of Environment last week?
Thank you. It's not a criticism really of the research paper, because Livingston and community housing were probably not asked or thought it was their responsibility to cover that topic, but it is a responsibility, a very key one, of the council, as exemplified and heightened by the release last week of the National Adaptation Plan, which told councils, it's a draft, but it's going to no doubt do it in the final, that you should direct development away from areas of coastal hazard and areas affected by climate change, which, as I made the point in my letter to the Dominion that they published, and also in my submission on PC2, is the coastal plain of Kāpiti district. So I think it is the strategy documents, the covering piece of the councils, that needs some modification and needs to acknowledge that issue before you adopt it as a strategy. It's not legally binding as a strategy, of course, but it's incomplete if it ignores that. Councillor Randall.
Thank you, Pat. And Councillor Randall, I'm sure that will come up in the discussion and responses from staff when we get to the paper in question as well. So if you're still tuning in, Pat, there might be a response from staff later on in relation to that particular question. Councillor Compton.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you for speaking to us this morning, Pat, and for your email. I have a question in regards to the email you sent us, where you claim that they're allowing 3-storey dwellings on vacant sections. You claim that most of them will be 3-storey mansions. Are you aware of the waterline development at 384 Kāpiti Road, which is on a 1/4 acre section, and they put 7 3-storey dwellings on there? So I'd put it to you that what you're claiming doesn't necessarily line up with reality. How would you respond to that?
Well, first of all, I followed your run around Wellington Harbour, Councillor Crompton, and you got some beautiful views. So if I may be allowed to say that on Twitter. To answer the question, the Kāpiti Road development is actually, I think, outside the area that I was referring to. The 3-storey buildings going in there certainly does represent an increase in dwelling numbers, and I don't have any view opposed to that particular development, as given the rather scanty knowledge I have of it, so it's subject to that. The point I make is, again, really related to the coastal area, which the district plan defines in terms of the area where the coastal environment is dominant. And in that area, that is where there's not actually a lot of new development going to occur as it happens, but where there are vacant sections, those sections, there will be an incentive to do 3-storey buildings on them, resulting in the effect that I just spoke of. The buildings will mean that those dwellings are 3 stories. They look out to see the Kāpiti Island, and they'll be very expensive. They won't contribute to increasing the number of dwellings in any substantial sense, and they will basically be counterproductive to both the environment, to the risk of it, and also to the neighbours who will be infuriated by this pepper potting of larger buildings, just as people object even today to this multi-storey building, of course, at Paraparaumu Beach, but you must know how much people are antagonistic to it. So that's what we're going to see, 3 stories in this case.
Thank you for that. As a follow-up, are you familiar with Policy 6 of the National Policy Statement on Urban Development? And this is speaking to the comments you just made about people complaining about it. And Policy 6B talks about that changes in urban form, the urban built form, they might detract from some people's amenity values, but that are appreciated by some people, but actually they might improve amenity values appreciated by other people. So you can't just blanketly say that it's a bad thing and that those changes aren't of themselves an adverse effect. So aren't you trying to advocate that we effectively break the law here?
No, I'm not advocating you break the law. The core of my general submission is that Kāpiti has been pushed into the area of urban intensification when it is not suitable. It's not a general proposition regarding building 3-storey buildings in Wellington. In most parts of Wellington, your view is of the local hill, and the same issues do not arise regarding coastal hazards. So I'm speaking to the combination, but in the case of Kāpiti, the effect of three-storey buildings will be much more severe than, for example, in Wellington, because it is a coastal flat plain and it has been specifically protected in, for example, the Waikanai Garden precinct against height. Now, I think that the result will be that it will be a less attractive environment, whereas in Wellington, that's not the case. Now, coming just very, very briefly to the law, the point is essentially grounded in the coastal policy statement. And my observation is that three-storey buildings pepper-potted across the coastal plain is not advantageous to the objective of the Act. And that, in fact, I think it's a general mistake that's been made that having three stories should be conditional upon them being multi-dwelling developments.
Pat, I'm going to wind up.
Yes, I'll leave it there.
I think you have responded quite fully and made your point, Councillor Compton. I just want to check. I would like to move it on, but have you?
Just one very quick one, and that would be whether you are aware that the median house price in Kāpiti is just sitting about $5,000 under $1 million. And surely you understand the laws of supply and demand, and having a greater supply of housing is going to help address housing costs.
Agreed, but not by having randomly spread three-storey buildings in the already inhabited coastal plain that increase the exposure. I support your intensifications beyond the coastal plain.
Thank you, Pat. Look, I don't see any further. Oh, Councillor Pravanos just jumped there at the last second.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Pat, for setting out your thoughts today and coming along today. So, I have a question. So, one of the comments you made was that potentially there's going to be random, I suppose, buildings going on sites up to 3 stories. So given that, how do you view that I suppose the aesthetics of an area are going to be enhanced when each of these sites are going to be looked at individually?
Well, exactly, that's the problem. That when I say random, I mean there are sections scattered through, not a lot though, scattered through the coastal area. And those are where these 3-story buildings will now be built, because that is the financial incentive. The fact that the sections cost so much will make it also attractive to build a larger building on it. You can already see that the buildings being built in Waikanai Beach are now occupying fully the sections, the latest 2 that are built in Tuteri Street illustrated. So the bottom line is just that you're going to kind of create a competition in which, where there's a vacant section, somebody builds a 3-story building, and then people consider whether they can push up their own buildings. The whole process is not going to, in those areas, generate more dwellings. It's just going to generate more expensive mansions and make the place, transform it into large mansionville, as I see it.
Councillor Provanov, did you have any further questions?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So you mentioned that a lot of the houses at Waikanai Beach, for example, cover a large percentage of the section. It's my understanding, given the zoning that is there now, that it is a certain percentage, and I think that is to protect, the environment. But I'm just wondering whether or not by potentially removing the that aesthetics, the Waikanai Beach zoning, that it is actually going to get worse because that protection will also disappear.
Well, that's true. The special character will go. And the gain from the loss of that is likely to be quite small. It's the beach areas are 10% of the areas designated for MDRS. So it's 10%, but then that 10% does not have many vacant spaces. And so the result of the MDRS being applied is likely to be dysfunctional and not, in those areas, generate many additional dwellings.
Thank you.
Pat, just one last one from me. I take it from your email that you've read the reports, you've read the housing needs assessment. Would you agree that the situation on the Kāpiti coast is pretty dire based on the feedback and the statistics in the report?
Thank you. I tried to read it. It's a very impressive large document, so I couldn't claim to have read all of it. To answer your question briefly, there's an issue, sure. The issue, though, is that the area is extremely attractive and that the effects of trying to solve the problem by the NDRS, in my estimation, will be counterproductive in regard to the exposures to hazards, but also in regard to just how it will pan out. Whereas I think there are other parts of Kāpiti, including parts that have been open for development, where that dysfunction will not be occur. And if I might, Chair, just say one word, the Westpac have estimated that we went into 2020 after 5 years of high rates of immigration with a shortage of 75,000 houses, of which Kāpiti was part. They note that that has now come down to around 30,000, although if we opened up the borders too vigorously, as the Greens are suggesting, then the result would be that we have a further exacerbation. The problem is beginning to solve itself. Kāpiti needs to play its part, but not on the coastal area.
Thank you, Pat. I note that you've got quite a lot of interest in this area. If you have time, I would encourage you to have a look through that report in detail. It's pretty sobering. So we're going to move on now to the...
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and stick around. We will have some responses through the report, just in chatting with staff there. So we are now going to, just checking with Tanika, that is all for public speaking. Thank you. Getting used to the throw of things again. Moving on to item 6A, public speaking time responses. I don't think there are any at this moment, but I just want to double check, Sean. It's better to go through in the body of the report. We will respond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, we will respond to those, I guess, at the start of that paper when that comes up on the agenda.
Thank you. Item 6B, leave of absence. Doesn't appear to be any. 6C, matters of an urgent nature. There have been none brought to my attention. So item number 7 on the report is updates. There is none. And so we're going to move straight away into item number 8.1, which is the Lgfa statement of intent, and invite Ian up to the table. And we also have Mark Butcher from the Lgfa to speak to the report as well. Mark, I have had a quick chat to Ian. We've got quite a full agenda today. You've got a bit of a slot here. I think for the team it is largely business as usual from what I've read. So feel free to do your bit, but don't be offended if we move through, hopefully relatively quickly. So over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Morning, everybody. And yeah, just like again to introduce Mark Butcher, who's the Chief Executive of Lgfa. Welcome to the meeting, Mark, and we'll pass across to Mark shortly just to speak to the papers. But to provide a very quick overview, Lgfa is a CCO of council, and with that we have an obligation to regularly monitor the performance and in particular consider the SOI. So Lgfa have recently produced a half-year report to December, as well as a draft SOI for the coming year, and you've got both of those documents included in your papers. Really at that point, I'll just pass straight across to Mark and just ask him to talk to key points or anything else that he wishes to discuss. Thanks, Mark.
Morena, Mark, over to you and welcome.
Marina, thank you. Okay, look, I'll be very quick. I know that being first on the council agenda is a special privilege and it comes with responsibilities about getting through it very quickly. Look, first, I just wanted to again highlight the special relationship that Lgfa has with the council. You are our 8th largest borrower. You have, I think, $270 million of borrowings from us, so that's around about 2% of our lending. You contribute, I think, just over 1% of our guarantee as well. You've also been a shareholder since 2012, so one of the original shareholders. You've been a big supporter of us through the years. A good example is you've just taken up some of our new products, which is like the standby facility product last year. Now, I do want to acknowledge the team and the relationship we have with Wayne Maxwell, Mark DeHaas, and the wider finance team. So it's a very, very strong relationship. I probably don't want to dwell too much then. You have a presentation in front of you. I think just really a couple of things on that second slide around what's been happening at Lgfa over the past 2 years over the COVID period. I think importantly, sorry, I just someone going to controllers, I think. Sorry, just on page 2 there. So extreme market dislocation, and for instance, in 2021, we saw interest rates at historic lows. In New Zealand, there's even talk of interest rates going negative at that time. In 2022, we've seen the largest rise in yields over probably 50 or 60 years now. In the space of 7 months now, interest rates have moved up to where they were 8 years ago. And for instance, the 5-year New Zealand government bond yield was 0% in late 2020. It's now 3.5%, and it's actually doubled in the past 5 months. So that's actually a really significant headwind for council borrowers and for Lgfa. Importantly, we have a AAA credit rating from S&P. That is really important. That's the highest credit rating you can get. And as a result, it means that we can deliver cheap borrowing or the lowest borrowing cost to you. In terms of council members, we have 74 councils now. We have 3 more councils in the pipeline. So by the end of this year, the last remaining council will be Chatham Islands District Council. We have actually approved them to join, but they're unlikely to join because of their low levels of debt. 2 really important things for us at the moment. One is, and this probably shows in terms of what we discussed at our Lgfa Board Strategy Day in March. The 2 topics on that agenda, there's normally about 6 or 8. First topic was sustainability, and second topic was 3 waters. So you can get the feel for what we are really focused on currently. And then finally, from a shareholder point of view, for your input, we are having some governance changes occurring now. We've had some changes at the Shareholders' Council. There's been a refresh late last year, and we're having a board refresh starting in November this year, where over the next 3 years we will have 3 directors rotating off the board. So that's obviously very important. I think maybe we just go straight through to the financials on slide 6 for the 6-month period. And then I'll talk to the SOI shortly. So for the 6-month period to DEC 2021, we met 8 out of the 10 performance objectives. The 2 we missed on, there's a small miss on market share. I think we're at 79% of council borrowing as opposed to 80%. And then the second miss that we had was on the council visits, but obviously that was COVID and lockdown. In the 9-month period to March of this year, we're behind on the further objective and just slightly behind, and that's on the financials. So we're scrambling like we can to get our market share above 80%, and also the council visits done as well too. So, but nothing substantial there. In terms of the SOI, we are reforecasting our financial forecasts currently, given the significant rise in interest rates over the last 2 months or since February. In terms of the objectives and the KPIs under it, we have 20 performance targets in our draft SOI. All those 20 performance targets relate back into those 5 strategic priorities that's actually on an earlier slide that I'm not going to talk to. And those 5 strategic priorities are what we're actually on material topics under GRI reporting going forward. So at your leisure, go back and have a look at those performance targets and those strategic priorities, but I won't dwell on them today. Finally, if you just go through to slides 9 and 10, please, just to talk very briefly about what we're doing around sustainability in green, social and sustainable lending to councils. We have embraced sustainability. As I said, it's one of our key priorities. We have looked internally as to what we can do as an organisation. We do have a very low carbon footprint. We only have 9 staff. But we have achieved Taitū Carbon Zero certification. We have appointed a head of sustainability. That person's role is to work with councils and also Lgfa. We now have a sustainability committee. There's 4 external members on that committee. They are effectively there to advise the Lgfa board and management on sustainability matters. Finally, we have launched a green, social, sustainable lending program, and we're also considering other products that we can launch for councils. These products basically encourage or incentivise councils to consider projects that are sustainable, socially responsible, will contribute to GHG emission reduction as well too. So just on the next page, we launched the Green Social Sustainable Loans in October, I think it was, 2021. So far we have approved Takina, so the Wellington City Council Convention and Event Centre, that's a 5-star green building. We have approved and lent money on the Riverlink project to the Greater Wellington Regional Council for the flood protection work on the Hutt River. I think both those projects combined to over $430 million. Hutt City Council will probably be the next council to look at drawing down under a green, social and sustainable loan. That will be to fund the Nai swimming pool complex shortly as well too. Finally, on sustainability, we ran a sustainability workshop for council staff, I think it was 2 weeks ago now. That was an online webinar. We had over 60 attendees. We've actually put that recording up on YouTube. So if you do want to have a look at what we're doing in more detail on sustainability and we showcase some of these projects, then I think reach out to your council finance staff and they can forward that link on to you as well too. With that, Chair, I will hand it back to you for questions.
Thank you very much for that, Mark, and great to see the stuff around the sustainable loans as well. I remember the discussion a few years back when there was a bit of a challenge to the Lgfa about what it was doing in the sustainability space. So I think certainly stepped up to the plate there. Ian, anything further from
nothing from me
from yourself? All right, I'm going to open it up for any questions from elected members, and I have Councillor Compton.
Thank you. Through the chair, Mark, the Lgfa talks about its investigating innovative financial products and the like, and you've talked about the expansion out into green loans and that, which I think Auckland councils picked up on in quite a large way. You'll be aware that the local government sector as a whole, but particularly here, say in the Wellington region, we're struggling with insurance. Now, I appreciate it's a slightly different financial product, but has the Lgfa looked at what it could do in that space, or would it require direction from shareholder councils to start looking at what could be done in that space to help support councils and take a similar approach to risk management and being able to appropriately access that, given the difficulties in the insurance space currently, especially with underwriting and the like?
Yeah, so I suppose we would have to take direction from the shareholders on that. We've had a very clear focus over the last 10 years, and it is to deliver the cheapest cost of funds to the sector, to be there at any time when a council wants to borrow, and to also provide long-dated funding to the sector. So we've never gone off into funds management, insurance, advisory space at all, because we've decided that we'd do one thing really, really well, and we felt that there was some substantial savings and efficiencies for the sector, and that's what we've purely been focused on. So yes, we're aware of the issues around insurance and risk management, but we haven't been directed to look at that.
Cool. Thank you.
Good question, Gwen. Councillor Halliday.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I just have three quick questions. In the draft statement of intent, it's mentioned that there estimate there could be between 4 and 5 billion in three waters-related loans by 1st of July 2014. I was just curious. I don't really get that because with government fundamentally the government taking those assets off councils, what would that borrowing be in relation to? I would have assumed that the government wouldn't be borrowing through Lgfa as such. So where would that borrowing potentially come from?
Yeah, so that number is around the fact that we've projected what we currently think that councils have borrowed from us against three waters-related assets. We think that by 2024, that will be somewhere between $4 and $6 billion of our loans to councils will be three waters-related. So depending upon how the transition goes, we would be expecting our balance sheet, if we're not involved in three waters, our balance sheet will drop by between $4 to $6 billion of those loans. That's what that statement is trying to say.
That clarifies.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Next question is more to our financial team. It is in relation to the three waters as well. I was just curious to know, we will be needing to identify debt in relation to three waters. But I was just wondering, how does that affect our long-term debt obligations through however that transition is going to happen?
Well, we're still waiting on the detail, I guess, out of DIA around how this is going to work. But fundamentally, we've been asked to identify our own debt obligations that relate to water assets, and we disclosed a view of that through the RFI 12 months or so ago. And we're expecting that work will be refreshed when they come out to do their due diligence, and we would expect, as the assets transfer, so the related debt, one way or another, will transfer. So our debt relating to water, we would expect, will go across to the new entity.
Cool. Thank you for that. Our last question was in relation to the GSS initiative, which I think is a fantastic initiative. But I'm just, again, curious. You're talking about a reduced margin for these boroughs, yet the idea between Lgfa is to supply funding to councils at the cheapest possible rate. So if you're supplying funding to us at the cheapest possible rate, how can that be discounted?
Yes, okay. It's been discounted because we're sacrificing profitability to basically encourage councils to think about what projects they can bring forward, which will reduce GHG emissions. So we have a tiering structure in terms of our pricing, depending upon what your credit rating is as a council borrower, whether or not you're a guarantor of our Lgfa. And so we've brought in this additional one. So it means that a council who comes to us, if say Kāpiti comes to us, currently I think that you're borrowing at a margin of 15 basis points in terms of the additional cost of funds. We would make that new loan to you at 10 basis points. So we are sacrificing profitability at our end, but we think it's a good thing to do as an incentive and as a signalling mechanism.
So you are quite literally putting your money where your mouth is. So thank you very much.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Holborough.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I had a similar question around the three waters. Just to follow that up a little bit more, Part of the reason for forming the larger entities was the ability to procure more favourable loan arrangements. If the water entities went through Lgfa, would that be a situation which could happen, and would that mean that it wasn't so important, the size of the entities, in terms of their ability to borrow? If we've got $4 to $5 billion already funded through Lgfa, would that not be as favourable in terms of lending rates as a large water entity?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. It hasn't been resolved yet. Obviously, the ideas of the Three Waters reform is to introduce scale, economies of scale, into all aspects of Three Waters delivery, which includes the financing of these entities. Lgfa is because of our AAA credit rating, because of what we've done with investors and banks over the last 10 years, we are the cheapest borrower in New Zealand domestic capital markets after the New Zealand government. So we can then pass on those savings to our council members. So going forward, currently as it stands now, because we lend to councils secured against rates revenue, or because we lend to CCOs secured against a council guarantee, or to CCTOs of uncalled capital, we, under our current structure, cannot lend to these proposed water entities until we find out more about the security that's being offered to their potential lenders. So that discussion is not on the table yet. We are having discussions with central government. We've said that, look, we're here to help the sector and help central government. So we are having discussions with central government over how potentially Lgfa could play a role, but nothing's been decided yet, because I think to date the Three Waters reform has been at that higher level in terms of decision makings around co-governance, around ownership structures, and I think it's only now that they are starting to get into the more technical aspects around issues such as financing. So I think, Councillor, those issues will be resolved over the next 6 months to a year.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. It would seem to me that it's good to think about these things at the outset, because if you're using an argument in terms of scale, sorry, I don't mean to debate, but if you're using an argument in terms of scale, then the form of the entities and the size of the entities has an impact on the financial arrangements and vice versa. So actually the financing should feed into those initial decisions, and I think it has to some extent, but certainly, yeah, that I'll watch with interest that conversation happening over the next 6 months or so. So my next question is around funding of other entities. You mentioned that Lgfa funds CCOs. We're at the moment looking at an affordable housing provision model, looking at whether that's going to be a trust or a CCO or something else. Has Lgfa ever funded trusts for housing provision or anything of that nature?
No, we haven't. So for the first 9 years, we were funding only councils. For the last year, we've been allowed by our shareholders to actually lend to CCOs and CCTOs. So there's no, again, because of the restrictions on the security that we require. However, it depends upon the scale as well. What we've found is that councils are considering obviously borrowing and then on lending to these trusts or these smaller entities. And without obviously going into detail, because I don't know the detail, it could be a possibility that if it's a social housing provider, if we were lending to council, that would actually meet one of the criteria for one of our social loans, and you'd actually achieve the discount on that loan. So it's not just green loans, it's also social loans that we're doing. And we are looking at the moment for one council who is a social housing provider as to whether or not they can put that project under our social lending.
Oh, that's brilliant. And the environmental sustainable loans too, really interested in that in terms of some of the projects we've got coming up. So thank you very much for today.
Okay.
Last one from, Councillor Elliott and then Councillor Compton.
Look, thank you, Mark. Firstly, congratulations on your Toitu certification, and I'm going to speak to that and your sustainability efforts and debate, so I hope you stick around. Look, I did have a question about your discussions with TIA and Three Waters and whether or not they're satisfactory to you and how that discussion, how active it is, but I think that you've already answered that question to our Deputy Mayor, so thank you.
All right, Councillor Compton.
Thank you. Through the chair, this is more of a question for Shauna, I think, and that would be, what would be the process, or maybe Ian actually, but what would be the process that we'd have to go through if, given we are a shareholding council, to actually get something on the agenda for this, I guess, because there is a shareholder council, isn't there, for Lgfa, to get them to consider requesting some sort of report or something looking at the feasibility of Lgfa branching out into insurance here.
I might just ask Mark to respond to that. I mean, I assume we would channel it up through the shareholder council for consideration from there. Would that be right?
I'm just going to hand it over to, I saw Mark De Haast, two Marks.
I beg your pardon.
Mark De Haast. Okay, so we're going to go to Mark online first, Mark Butcher, and then we're going to go to Mark De Haast. So, Mark Butcher.
Yeah, I think the best way of doing it is to go through the Shareholders Council. There's 10 representatives of councils on that Shareholders Council, including central government. So I think that would probably be the better way of doing it.
Mark De Haast.
So thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. So just a couple of things. So on the Shareholders Council, we obviously have a representative for the Wellington region, which we work very well with that representative, and as we heard from Mark Butcher this morning, we've got a really good relationship with Lgfa. So a couple of years ago, I think you will recall that both Wayne and myself talked to you about something that was bubbling in the scenes called the Local Government Risk Agency, which was looking at, how do you there was exploration on how particularly smaller councils could get better risk management, and what was sort of part of that was insurance. So and that sort of, I guess, COVID-19 hit, and we needed guaranteed access to borrowings and liquidity. So that's why Lgfa focused more on what they've been set up to do. Insurance is a huge problem for us, and we recently went to the Audit and Risk Subcommittee where we tabled a paper and a proposal. We're looking at what's called alternate risk transfer models, and through that we've been given the green light, and we're working with our broker, and we will be bringing a paper back to council. We're looking at things like quite technical stuff called captives, which is standalone insurance companies. And there could be an option for that. It's very technical. It's pretty much a company, and you need scalability for that. So we would need, at the very least, we'd need all the councils of the Wellington region to sign up to that. There's a faster, better route called the protected cell, which is a more formal, structured way of having a self-insurance fund to the benefit of ratepayers. So you can put money in, it does get invested, but it's the benefit of ratepayers. You can take money out as and when. So. Absolutely, we can certainly engage with Mark Butcher and our friends from Lgfa to see if there's any work that's being done. But at the same time, we've been very proactive. The insurance market is tightening. Not only is there huge pressure on price, but capacity. So the Wellington region is just almost being deemed uninsurable. So rest assured, there's lots of work that's happening, and we will be coming back to you. We've just renewed our insurance for the next year. But our thinking at the moment is it's not going to be quite so simple in 1 year's time. So we are desperately looking at other ways to make sure that we've got the capacity and to make sure that our premium increases don't keep continuing to be what they are.
Thank you, Mark. So with that, I'm going to move back to the paper. Recommendations or recommendation is found on page 6 of the report. And if we have someone that's happy to, Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Compton, moved those recommendations. Right of introduction. Sorry, Councillor Elliott?
You moved it.
No, I said moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Compton. So right of introduction, Councillor Elliott.
Okay, thank you. Look, I'd like to congratulate this. I am relying heavily on staff for assurance that all those graphs are absolutely 101. But I would like to comment on the efforts of our Lgfa, Mark, on your sustainability plan, your organisational plan, your objectives, performance measures and targets as outlined in the report on appendix on page 15. Look, I can't say enough. I'm utterly delighted that this was something that myself and our councillor Sophie Henford brought up the last time you were here in chambers with us, and then it's really great to see that your efforts, you've gone on boots and all, and really happy to see the work you've done as an organisation. Please pass that on to the organisation. Well done. Secondly, I'm also very keen to watch the development and implementation of the ratepayer financing scheme that could provide temporary rates relief to ratepayers via rates postponement. I can see how this could be of much benefit to ratepayers across the country, and I see especially those affected by natural disasters and extreme weather events. So well done on all your initiatives. Interested in the insurance conversation as it gets down the track. And thank you very much. I will be supporting this recommendation.
Let's see any further names up on the screen. Councillor Henford reaching for the button.
Super briefly, I'd just like to tautoko the comments of Councillor Elliott and thank you, Mark, and the rest of your team for really taking that challenge seriously. And when Councillor Elliott and I did email through, we were pleased with the kind of updates we were getting regularly on where you were at and incorporating both the kind of will of our table to see some of those sustainable principles incorporated within your statement of intent, but also, as you mentioned, that's the will of a lot of other councils around the country, because we know it's the way in which we need to be headed right now, because we're in the midst of a serious crisis. So just would really like to tautoko that and implore that you take that back to your team, and we look forward to seeing how in the next few years too your statement of intent in relation to sustainability and climate aspirations continues to be more ambitious. But yeah, I think you've done a great job for just incorporating it to this level over the last year or so. So a huge well done from us.
Thank you, Sophie. So I don't see any further names up on the screen. I'm just going to check Zoom. Tanika, nothing there. So I'm going to put that, I'll just formally check right of reply is waived, Councillor Elliott. Thank you. I'm going to put that to the vote. All those in favour say aye. If you're online, the green tick, aye. Those against, and that is carried. Thank you, Mark, for joining us this morning, and also Ian and Mark DeHaas for your input as well. We're going to move on to the next, I'll just think in terms of time, around a coffee break. We're going for an hour, team. I'm just thinking this next one will be quite a meaty discussion. Looking around the table, do we want to have a quick 5-minute break and then get into the big stuff? We've got, external-wise, we've got Steve still here. Are you okay, Steve? Yep. Okay, so we're going to stop for 5 minutes and then we'll get back into the next item on the agenda.